You don't realize how desperately you need control until it's gone. For 17 years, my life was a fortress of control. I lived in a city of concrete and right angles, worked a 9 to 5 where my day was dictated by scheduled meetings and color-coded spreadsheets, and came home to an apartment where even the temperature was preset to a perfect 72 degrees. I was Hillary, senior data analyst, and my world made sense. It was predictable. It was safe. It was also suffocating me. That's why I took up survivalism. It started as a hobby, a way to feel a little less like a cog in a machine. I devoured books by grizzled old mountain men, watched hours of shows about guys with beards building shelters out of sticks and mud. I learned 100 ways to start a fire, how to find north using a watch, how to filter water with layers of sand and charcoal. In theory, I was more capable than any of them. I had the knowledge, meticulously cataloged in my brain, cross-referenced and optimized. It made me feel powerful, in control. Then came the promotion. Or rather, the promotion that wasn't mine. I'd been chasing it for 2 years, putting in the 80-hour weeks, swallowing the corporate nonsense, playing the game. They gave it to Mark from accounting. Mark, who couldn't format a spreadsheet to save his life, but knew how to golf with the VP of sales. When my boss, Dave, called me into his glass-walled office, he gave me that fake pity look they teach in management seminars. We just felt Mark was a better fit for the culture of the leadership team, which was corporate speak for, he's one of the boys. I just nodded. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I walked back to my desk, sat down in my ergonomic chair, and felt the walls of my carefully constructed fortress crumble into dust. It wasn't about the money or the title. It was the feeling of being rendered completely, utterly insignificant, powerless. That's when this trip stopped being a hobby. It became a necessity, a pilgrimage. I needed to prove to myself that I was more than a name on a rejected promotion application. I needed to be somewhere real, somewhere where the rules were clear and brutally honest. You are either capable or you are not. There's no office politics in the deep woods. So I planned it with the same obsessive detail I'd use for a quarterly report. Topographical maps, laminated, gearless, cross-checked, meal plans, vacuum sealed. So here I am, 2 days in, maybe 50 kilometers from the nearest paved road, deep in the Kaskaskia National Forest. My camp is perfect, just like in the books. The A-frame tent is secure, pitched on high ground with the door facing east. The fire pit is a model of safety, ringed with stones, a safe distance from any low-hanging branches. My water filter is bubbling away, turning murky creek water into life. Every single thing is exactly where it should be, a perfect little island of order in the heart of the wild. I am capable. I am in control. But as the sun bleeds out behind the jagged line of pines, the forest is changing. The friendly afternoon birdsong has been replaced by an unearning silence. And underneath that silence, there's something else. A sound. No, not a sound. It's a feeling, a low thrum that vibrates up through the soles of my boots. Like the whole world is holding its breath. I try to dismiss it. Distant logging equipment, an underground stream, but it feels wrong. It feels like the feeling of being watched, not by a bear or a coyote, but by something that knows my name. And the most terrifying part, this feeling isn't in any of my books. That feeling,
That deep, resonant thrumming didn't go away. It was a constant, a bass note under the skin of the world, and it was getting stronger. I tried to rationalize it. Low-frequency sound can travel for miles, I told myself, my brain automatically quoting a passage from the SAS Survival Handbook. It was probably just some distant machinery, a train, anything from the world I'd left behind. But my gut, an instinct I didn't know I had, told me I was lying to myself. The source wasn't miles away. It felt close, and it felt alive. That's when the rain started. Not a gentle pitter-patter, but a sudden cold drizzle that felt less like weather and more like a decision. It soaked the carefully stacked firewood I'd gathered and hissed at the edges of my perfect fire. My little island of control was being washed away. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of my confidence. Okay, don't panic. Adapt and overcome. I pulled my poncho tighter and scanned the darkening woods, my headlamp cutting a nervous slice through the gloom. And then I saw it. A dark opening in a rock face, not 20 meters from my camp. A cave. Dry, dark, and deep. It was a stroke of unbelievable luck, a perfect ready-made shelter. My training kicked in. A cave offers superior protection from the elements, a natural fortress. With a surge of renewed confidence, I grabbed my pack and scrambled towards it, dragging my essential gear into the dry, earthy-smelling darkness. Forget the tent, forget the fire. This was better. I was still in control. I had adapted. I was a survivor. I sat just inside the mouth of the cave, watching the drizzle turn into a torrential downpour. The world outside became a wall of gray noise and blurred green. It was actually cozy. I felt safe, smug even, for my cleverness. I pulled out an energy bar and took a bite, feeling the sweet victory. Let it rain. Let the storm rage. I had outsmarted it. But as the last of the daylight vanished, the sounds of the forest changed. It wasn't the silence from before. This was different. It was a chorus of snapping twigs and rustling leaves, frantic and wrong. It sounded like every small animal in the woods was running, all at once, in every direction. Running from something. My breath hitched in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs. And then, at the edge of the tree line, a shape emerged from the rain. It was too big to be a black bear. Its silhouette was wrong, hulking and broad in a way that defied the natural order. It just stood there, motionless, a black void against the gray storm. I couldn't see its face, couldn't make out any details, but I didn't need to. Every survival instinct I'd ever read about screamed at me in a single, silent word: predator. I shrank back into the cave, my body turning to ice. My meticulously planned trip, my test of self-reliance, had just turned into a terrifying waiting game. The cave wasn't a shelter, it was a trap, and the monster was blocking the door. For what felt like hours, I did nothing. I just sat there in the cold dark, my back pressed against a rock, and watched the shape. I was waiting for it to move on, to lose interest, to do what the book said a wild animal should do. It didn't. It just stood there, an unmoving sentinel in the downpour. My analytical mind, the part of me that color-coded spreadsheets and built fortresses of logic, kicked in to fight the rising tide of panic. It's just a bear, it insisted. Probably a Kodiak, far from its normal territory. Unusual, but not impossible. It doesn't know you're here. Stay quiet. It will lose interest. I clung to that thought like a prayer.
It was my last anchor to the world I understood, the world that followed rules. But the thrumming I'd felt earlier was back, stronger now, radiating through the rock and bone of the cave. And it seemed to be coming from the bear itself. It was a low, guttural vibration that I could feel in my teeth. I slowly, carefully unzipped a pocket on my pack and pulled out my night vision monocular, another piece of expensive, top-of-the-line gear I'd bought to feel prepared. My hands were shaking so badly it took me a few seconds to focus it. I raised it to my eye, the world outside turning a sickly digital green. The creature was still there, its form massive and shaggy. I zoomed in, trying to get a detail, anything to make it make sense. Then a flash of lightning split the sky, and for a terrifying, unforgettable second, the world outside was brighter than day. The monocular flared, blinding me, but not before the image was burned into my retinas. The creature's fur was matted and black, slicked with brain like crude oil. Its head was massive, but the face wasn't a bear's. There was no snout, just a flat, brutal mask of fury with eyes that glowed with a faint internal red light. And it wasn't standing on 4 legs. It was standing on 5. A 5th leg, thick and brong, protruding from the center of its chest, the massive paw at its end digging a trench in the wet earth as it shifted its weight. A choked sob escaped my lips. My brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. My books, my shows, my meticulously cataloged knowledge, all of it was useless ash in the face of this impossibility. 5 legs, glowing eyes. That wasn't an animal, that was a monster from a story told to frighten children. And as that realization hit me, a new sound cut through the storm. It didn't come from the monster outside. It came from the darkness behind me. Deeper in the cave, a voice, high-pitched and unnervingly calm, echoed off the damp rock. It was as clear as a bell, perfectly articulate, and it spoke a single word. Hillary. My name. Hearing my name in that place, in that perfectly calm, high-pitched voice, broke something in my mind. The storm, the rain, the 5-pod monster at the mouth of the cave, all of it was a physical, understandable threat. But this was different. This was an intelligence. This was personal. This was the Watcher in the woods.
Who's there? My voice was a pathetic, trembling whisper that the damp air seemed to swallow instantly. The voice from the darkness answered without hesitation, its tone light, almost conversational, like a friendly stranger making small talk. Just a friend, Hillary. I've been waiting for you. That thing outside, he's one of mine. A bit messy, I'll admit, but he gets the job done. He's here to keep you safe. With me. My blood ran cold. One of his? The bear wasn't a random monster, it was a guard dog, a hound set to keep the prey cornered. My meticulously chosen shelter wasn't a refuge, it was a pantry. Every single decision I'd made since the rain started, every clever adaptation I thought was a victory for my survival skills, had just herded me deeper into the trap. The feeling of being powerless, the one I'd fled my sterile office life to escape, crashed over me with the force of a physical blow. I was a data point on a spreadsheet again, a variable in someone else's horrifying equation. I scrambled backward, away from the voice, my back hitting the damp cave wall with a thud. My headlamp beam sliced wildly through the darkness, revealing nothing but glistening rock and deep shadow. In front of me, the monstrous bear shifted, its bulk blocking the silvery light of the storm. I was caught. A rock and a hard place didn't begin to describe it. "Don't be afraid," the voice cooed from the blackness. "I know all about you.
I know about the promotion you didn't get. I know about Mark and Dave and that little glass office. I know how small they made you feel. Every word was a precise surgical cut into my deepest insecurities. You came here to feel big, didn't you? To feel in control. I can give you that. Real control, real power. Not like the make-believe power they hand out in boardrooms. Just come a little deeper. We can talk about the terms. My survivalist brain, the last bastion of my old self, screamed at me. It was a lure, the oldest trick in the predator's book. Isolate the prey, disorient it, offer it what it wants most, and then spring the trap. It was trying to get me off balance, to make me walk into the dark. My only chance, the books would say, was the devil I could see. The bear at the entrance took a heavy step forward into the cave, then another. Its red eyes fixed on me, its face illuminated by another flash of lightning, began to shift. The matted fur seemed to retract, pulling back into the flesh as the bone structure beneath it audibly cracked and reformed. The flat, brutish features stretched and contorted. It was becoming something hideously, mockingly human. A caricature of a face, mouth pulled wide in a silent, furious scream. That was it. My mind snapped. I wasn't going to be a victim cowering in the dock. I was a survivor. I saw my chance, a narrow gap, maybe 2 feet wide, between the creature's side and the cave wall. If I was fast, I could slip past it. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my hand closing around the small survival knife at my belt. It was a pathetic weapon against that thing, but it was mine. It was an action. It was control. I ran. I lunged for the gap, screaming a raw, ragged sound of defiance. For a split second, I thought I'd made it. I felt the cold, rain-soaked air on my face, smelled the ozone from the storm. Freedom! Then something slammed into my side with the force of a car crash. It wasn't one of the 4 paws I was watching for. It was the 5th one, the one from its chest, hooking into my ribs with an unnatural, prehensile precision. It lifted me off the ground as if I weighed nothing, my knife clattering uselessly onto the rocks.
I was pinned. The creature slammed me against the cold, wet cave wall, the jagged rack biting into my back. All the air rushed out my lungs in a pained grunt. The pain was blinding, a white-hot explosion in my side, but it was nothing compared to the absolute, soul-crushing terror of my utter helplessness. I was staring into its morphing, impossible face, now just inches from mine. The human-like mask was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of shadow and those 2 burning red embers. It smelled of wet fur, decay, and cold stone. My knowledge, my planning, my desperate need to prove myself, all of it meant nothing. I was just meat, caught in a trap I'd walked into with a smug sense of accomplishment. My vision began to tunnel, the edges turning gray and fuzzy. The sounds of the storm faded into a dull roar. The only thing I could hear clearly was the high-pitched voice echoing from the darkness one last time. It was no longer soothing or conversational. It was filled with a kind of detached clinical curiosity, the tone of a scientist observing a failed experiment, the tone of my boss telling me I just wasn't a good fit. "You see, Hillary," it said, the words sliding into my fading consciousness like splinters of ice. "You never had control, not in your little office, and certainly not out here. But thank you for playing." The 5th paw squeezed, and I heard my ribs crack like dry twigs. A scream tried to form in my throat, but it came out as a wet gurgle.
The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of pain and darkness. The funny thing about control is that you think it's something you can achieve. I spent my whole life building a fortress against the feeling of being small and insignificant, only to run headfirst into a world where I was, truly and cosmically, nothing. My greatest trauma, the fear of being powerless, was not just a fear. It was a fundamental truth of my existence. I wasn't an analyst, or a survivor, or even a victim. In the end, I was just the entertainment for it. My last coherent thought wasn't of my life, or my family, or anything meaningful. It was the simple, devastating data point that my meticulously constructed fortress was built on a foundation of absolute nothing. Then there was only the thrumming and the dark.
They say the sea is the last great mystery on Earth, but that's not quite right. It's a mystery only because we lack the will and the funding to solve it. Everything, and I mean everything, can be understood if you just have the right tools, the right pressure gauges, the right sonar, the right light. Knowledge is a kind of armor. I've built my entire life on that single, simple principle, a fortress of observation and data against the chaos of the unknown. My name is Jules, and I hunt monsters for a living. Not the kind with horns and pitchforks, but the kind the pressure builds. I'm a marine biologist, and my very specific, very lonely little niche is abyssal gigantism. I study the things that grow to impossible sizes in the crushing dark, thousands of meters below the surface, where the water is a single degree above freezing and sunlight is a forgotten myth. Down there, the rules of biology bend. Squid grow as long as buses. Isopods become the size of dogs. It's a world of beautiful, terrifying mathematics, and I am one of its few obsessive accountants. I'm currently parked in the middle of the Pacific, floating over the Mariana Trench in a research vessel that smells of diesel, old coffee, and the faint, corrosive tang of salt. This tub, the Wanderer, is the only one that would have me and my French project. Below us is a gash in the planet's crust, so deep you could drop a mountain in it and still have a kilometer of water to spare. I'm here to prove a theory. Not my theory, but his, Dr. Eris Thorne. He believed that abyssal gigantism was just the beginning. He theorized that in the absolute deepest, most punishing parts of the trench, the Hadal Zone, there exist organisms on a scale for which we have no framework. Life that is not just big, but incomprehensibly vast. The scientific community called him a romantic, a crank. I called him my mentor. That's the professional reason I'm here, the one I put on the grant proposals. The real reason is a ghost story. Eris disappeared 10 years ago, right here, in this exact patch of indifferent blue water. He was on a solo dive in a submersible he designed himself, the Icarus. I was on the comms, a 26-year-old grad student hanging on his every word as he descended into the black. He was ecstatic, reporting pressure and temperature readings that were off the charts, life signs that made no sense. He described a field of bioluminescent flora that pulsed in a coordinated, rhythmic way he'd never seen before. He was laughing, his voice crackling with static and wonder, telling me we were about to change the world. And then he wasn't. There was no scream, no sound of metal groaning under pressure, just a sudden, sharp burst of static, like the universe itself had shrieked. The telemetry feeds went haywire, every sensor redlining at once. The hydrophones picked up a single, ultra-low frequency pulse that wasn't a whale, wasn't a geological event, wasn't anything on our charts. Then silence. The kind of profound, empty silence that feels louder than any noise. We searched for weeks. We found nothing.
No debris, no oil slick, no ping from the emergency beacon. The official report cited a catastrophic hull failure, a tragic accident. But I saw the data before they sealed the records. You don't get readings like that from a crack in a viewport. You get them when something that has existed in the dark for millions of years, something ancient and vast and utterly oblivious, finally moves. My terror isn't of the dark, or the pressure, or the monsters that might live there. My terror is of insignificance. It's the soul-shredding fear that the universe doesn't just not care about you, it doesn't even know you exist. So tomorrow, I'm getting in my own submersible, the Orpheus. I'm going down to the same coordinates where Eris vanished. I'm going to find what he found. I have to. Because if I can measure it, if I can classify it, if I can just understand it, then he wasn't just erased. He was noticed. And I can live with that, I think.
The descent was beautiful. For the first 9,000 meters, it was exactly what I had trained for, what I had dreamed of. My submersible, the Orpheus, performed flawlessly, a perfect little bubble of light and life against the encroaching dark. Through the thick acrylic viewport, I watched the world dissolve from azure to indigo to absolute black, cataloging the strange, elegant creatures that drifted past like ghosts in my floodlights. Xenophores trailed rainbow lights like living fiber optics, and giant jellyfish, their bells wider than I was tall, pulsed with a soft internal luminescence. I was in my element, my voice a calm, steady monologue into the mission recorder, logging every observation. Every data point, every new species logged was a victory. It was a vindication of Eris, of my entire life's work. The deep wasn't empty, it was majestic, serene, and it was finally yielding its secrets to me. I felt triumphant. I was documenting a particularly large bloom of the jellies, their gentle ballet a soothing presence in the abyss when it happened. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a feeling, a deep, resonant vibration that I felt in my teeth and the bones of my skull before my ears registered it. The water outside shimmered with the concussion. Then came a single, violent jolt. The Orpheus was thrown sideways as if swatted by an unseen hand, and my world became a chaotic mess of screaming alarms and flashing red lights. I was slammed against my restraints, the neat stacks of my equipment crashing to the floor in a shower of plastic and glass. Outside the viewport, the serene ballet of lights vanished, replaced by a swirling cloud of silt and panicked life. The main comms panel went dead with a final pathetic crackle. The power and data tether icon on my primary screen blinked yellow, then red, then went dark. Severed. I was alone, untethered, and falling through the deepest, darkest part of the world. After what felt like an eternity of spinning through the black, things stabilized. The emergency batteries kicked in, casting a low, grim red light through the cabin. I was adrift, but alive. My sonar was still active, and after a few frantic minutes of rebooting essential systems, it gave me a reading. Seafloor. 10,984 meters down. The numbers were a comfort, a piece of solid data in a world of chaos. I was falling, but I knew where the bottom was. The impact was surprisingly gentle, more of a soft settling than a crash, as if I'd landed on something yielding. For a long time, I just sat there listening to the hum of the life support and the frantic pounding of my own heart. The silence from the comms was absolute. No one was coming for me. But I was a scientist. Panic is a useless data point. I took a breath, steadied my hands, and turned on the external floodlights. The view outside was breathtaking. I had landed on a vast, flat,
plane, far flatter than any abyssal plane I'd ever seen mapped. It was covered in a thin layer of what looked like dark gray sediment, and stretching for kilometers in every direction were the fields of bioluminescent flora Ares had described. They weren't just pulsing randomly, they were moving in slow, coordinated waves of soft blue light, like a wind blowing across a field of ghostly grass. It was the most beautiful, alien thing I'd ever seen. My fear, the raw animal terror of the fall, began to recede, replaced by the familiar, intoxicating thrill of discovery. This was it. I had found his miracle. I was looking at a completely new ecosystem, maybe even a new form of life. But something was wrong. My gravimeter was giving me unstable readings, fluctuating in a slow, rhythmic way that made no sense. And the plane, it wasn't perfectly still. I focused my main camera on a ridge in the sediment a few hundred meters away, and I saw it shift. It was a slow, rhythmic movement, an undulation. The entire seafloor, this plane that stretched beyond the reach of my lights, was breathing. A deep, impossibly slow inhalation that took nearly a minute to complete, followed by an equally long exhalation. My mind, my logical, analytical mind, refused to accept what my eyes and instruments were telling me. It had to be a complex geothermal process, a super colony of microbes creating a chemical reaction that mimicked respiration. It had to be anything other than the truth. The alternative was a conclusion so massive, so paradigm-shattering, that my brain simply refused to compute it. I had to know. I powered up the external manipulator arm, my movements slow and deliberate, my heart a slow, heavy drum. If I could just get a sample of the sediment, of the rock underneath, I could analyze its composition. I could understand it. The metal claw extended from the sub, its small floodlight cutting a sharp, clinical beam through the dark. As it neared the surface, the rhythmic pulsing of the flora around me faltered, then stopped altogether. Everything went dark and still. The universe seemed to be holding its breath. The claw touched the ground, its pincers digging gently into the sediment, ready to close. The reaction was not geological. It was biological. The entire plane erupted in a blinding flash of golden light. Every single organism for kilometers in every direction flared in perfect, instantaneous synchrony. The light was so intense, it overloaded my cameras, but not before I saw what lay beneath the thin veil of silt. It wasn't rock. It was hide, a vast, wrinkled, ancient landscape of skin, scarred with craters and ravines so immense they could have been mountain ranges. The ground beneath me wasn't like it was breathing, it was breathing. I hadn't landed on the seafloor. I had landed on something that was living on it, something so colossal it had become the seafloor itself. My frantic hands flew across the controls, trying to fire the emergency thrusters, to do anything to get away, but it was too late. A current, powerful and inexorable, that caught me. It was pulling the Orpheus forward, dragging my tiny metal shell across the living continent of flesh. I was being drawn towards a new feature that was resolving out of the darkness ahead. It was a chasm, a swirling, miles-wide vortex of that same liquid golden light, a colossal, spiraling abyss in the flesh of the world. It was a geological feature on a planetary scale, and my mind screamed, trying to classify it. A siphonophore on a planetary scale? A mouth? A wound? As I was pulled closer, the light from the abyss grew, illuminating the true, mind-breaking topography of the creature. I was a single bacterium on the skin of a whale, and this whale was the size of a tectonic plate. The sheer, crushing scale of it annihilated every theory ever held, every metric I had ever used, my life's work, my obsessive need to classify what's a child's stamp collection in the face of the cosmos. And then I realized with a final, soul-shattering certainty that the chasm wasn't a mouth. And it wasn't a wound. The swirling light within it was coalescing, forming a structure of impossible complexity and size. It was an eye inside an iris, inside a sclera the size of a country. It was an eye, and it was beginning to open.
The moment of perception was not violent. It was silent, absolute, and total. As the great eye focused, the current pulling me forward ceased. I was simply held, suspended in the water a few kilometers from a celestial body made of living tissue. The golden light that emanated from it was not like the light from my flood lamps, a simple projection of photons. This light was information. It passed through the hull of the Orpheus as if it were glass, as if it weren't there at all. It passed through me. I did not see images or hear sounds. Instead, my mind, my consciousness, was flooded with a sudden, devastating understanding. The creature was not hostile. It was not even truly aware of me in any way I could comprehend. My existence, my submersible, my entire species was a phenomenon so fleeting, so infinitesimally small that it barely registered. The being perceived me not as a life form, but as a momentary, complex chemical reaction in the liquid that surrounded it, no more significant than a single salt crystal dissolving in the ocean. Eris Thorne's disappearance, the severing of my tether, they weren't attacks. They were the equivalent of a human blinking, a microscopic, unconscious twitch of an eyelid causing a ripple in the water that had erased him from existence. My mind, the fortress I had built from data and logic, was dismantled not by force, but by perspective. The knowledge I had sought my entire life, the armor I had so carefully constructed, was a paper shield against a supernova. The creature's consciousness was a universe of its own. I felt the slow, deliberate thoughts of eons, the awareness of gravity and dark matter, the patient observation of galaxies being born and dying. It was a being that did not live in the ocean. The ocean was a temporary condition of a planet it inhabited. My instruments were useless. My life's work was a footnote to a footnote in a language that had not yet been invented. My terror of insignificance was not a fear, it was the fundamental truth of the universe. I had come down here to measure a monster, and I had found God. And God, in its infinite placid existence, had not even noticed me. The emergency lights in the Orpheus flickered and died. The hum of the life support faded. My last breath misted the cold acrylic of the viewport. I was a scientist to the end, my final useless data point, my own life, a brief spark of electrical activity, being calmly, passively, and utterly comprehended into nothing. I had wanted to solve the mystery, and the answer was that I was not, and had never been, a part of the equation.
My world has always been a quiet one, but not a silent one. There's a difference. Quiet is the hum of the refrigerator, the gentle rustle of leaves outside the window, the soft scratch of my charcoal pencil against textured paper. Quiet is peaceful. Silence is a void. is the chilling absence of sound, the hollow space where a heartbeat should be. Before all this, my life was a masterpiece of quiet moments, each one centered around my son, Leo. He was, and is, the vibrant splash of color in my otherwise muted world. We had this connection, Leo and I, something that went beyond words. I could feel his moods like a change in the weather. A flicker of his sadness and his bright, curious eyes would send a chill down my spine. A burst of his unrestrained laughter was like the sun breaking through clouds. I'm a visual artist, you see. I paint feelings, not things. My studio is filled with canvases capturing the curve of Leo's smile, the specific shade of blue his eyes turned when he was deep in thought, the way his small hand fit perfectly in mine. My art was my language, a way to translate the deep, unspoken love that flowed between us. This need to communicate without words, to feel and understand on a deeper level, it wasn't just an artistic quirk. It was born from a deep, ragged wound in my past. My own mother, she was a beautiful, complicated soul who was slowly consumed by a storm in her mind. Towards the end, she stopped speaking completely. It wasn't a choice. It was as if the part of her that formed words had just shut down. She became a ghost in her own body, her eyes vacant, her hands still. I would sit with her for hours, holding her hand, talking to her, showing her my drawings, desperate for any flicker of recognition, any sign that she was still in there. But there was only silence. A thick, suffocating blanket of it that smothered every hope. That experience hollowed out a part of me, leaving behind a raw, visceral fear of silence. To me, losing the ability to connect with someone you love isn't just sad. It's a horror story. It's being buried alive. So with Leo, I held onto our bond with a fierce, almost desperate grip. Every word he spoke, every look he gave me, every secret he whispered in my ear was a precious shield against that all-consuming silence I feared so much. That's why the old woman in the park unnerved me so much, even before I knew what she was. It was a week before Leo disappeared. She was sitting on a bench, looking so sweet and frail, like a forgotten porcelain doll. She wore a simple, old-fashioned dress and a single strand of perfect pearls. But her eyes, they were a shocking, piercing blue, and they seemed to see right through me. She smiled as Leo chased a butterfly nearby, a kindly, wrinkled smile. "Such a perfect moment," she'd whispered, her voice thin and reedy. "It's a shame they can't last. They get so messy, don't they? All the noise, the words, it muddles the purity." Her hands, I noticed then, were folded in her lap. They were wrinkled, yes, but they were large, with a strength that seemed completely out of place with the rest of her delicate frame. I'd just give a polite, awkward nod and called Leo over, a strange coldness spreading through my chest. Her words echoed in my mind for days, a discordant note in the quiet symphony of my life. She spoke of purity and perfection, but all I could hear was the terrifying promise of silence.
The day it happened was painfully ordinary. It was a warm afternoon, the kind that feels lazy and safe. Golden light slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I was at the table, sketching, a half-empty mug of tea beside me. Leo was in the backyard, our little patch of green that was his entire kingdom. I could hear his happy chatter as he narrated some grand adventure for his plastic dinosaurs. The sound was a comforting backdrop to my work, the gentle rhythm of my world beating as it should. The yard was fenced in, secure. The back gate, which led to a small, dense thicket of trees, was always latched. I knew this because checking it was part of my morning ritual, a small act of assurance against a world I knew could be unpredictable. I remember looking up from my sketch pad, my eyes finding his small form, a flash of his red t-shirt by the sandbox. I smiled, a familiar warmth spreading through me, and then I looked down again, just for a minute, to capture the curve of a smile I just imagined. That minute was all it took. 1 minute. When I looked up again, the yard was still. The red of his t-shirt was gone. My first thought wasn't panic, but a mild annoyance. He was probably hiding, playing a game. "Leo," I called out, my voice calm. The only answer was the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. A flicker of unease, a tiny, cold thing, started to uncurl in my stomach. I stood up and walked to the window, scanning the entire yard. The swing was still, the sandbox was empty, and the back gate, the gate that I had checked this morning, was open. Just a crack. It wasn't flung wide open as if in a hurry. It was just slightly ajar, an invitation into the shadows of the woods beyond. There was no sound of running feet, no triumphant cry of "Found me!" There was nothing, just a profound and sudden quiet that felt jagged and wrong. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly seemed deafening, a mechanical mockery of a living pulse. My heart started to pound, a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. I ran outside, the warm air feeling suddenly cold against my skin. "Leo!" I yelled, and this time my voice cracked, the sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet. The world seemed to have been muted. Even the birds were silent. I reached the gate, my hand trembling as I touched the cold metal. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a clue left by a child. It was placed, deliberately. Neatly folded and tucked into the latch was a small, pristine white handkerchief. It was made of old, soft linen, impossibly clean. And on the corner, embroidered with a chilling neatness in a familiar shade of piercing blue thread, was a single, perfect pearl. My blood ran cold. The image of the frail old woman on the park bench flashed in my mind. Her kindly smile, her strong hands, her string of pearls. Such a perfect moment, she had said. The cold dread that had been a flicker of unease was now a raging inferno. This wasn't a random, tragic accident. This was a statement, a piece of art. And my son, my beautiful, vibrant son, was the canvas.
2 weeks passed. 14 days of a silence so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. The police were kind, but useless. They had no leads, no suspects, no answers. My house, once a haven of quiet comfort, became a tomb. Every corner echoed with the absence of Leo's laughter, his questions, his small footsteps. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I just sat in my studio, surrounded by his portraits, staring at the empty canvases, unable to make a single mark. The silence I had feared my entire life was no longer a threat. It was my reality. Then on the 15th day, the note arrived. It was in a simple cream-colored envelope slipped under the front door. My name was written on the front in an elegant, looping script. Inside, a single sheet of thick, expensive paper held a message written in the same hand. Your son is a masterpiece, a perfect, preserved moment of love, untainted by the chaos of the world. The final brushstroke is about to be applied. If you wish to witness the unveiling, come to the old Hemlock House on Route 9 at dusk. Come alone. Your connection will be your guide. Tucked inside the folded note was not a lock of hair, not a piece of clothing, but something far more intimate and horrifying. It was a small, framed watercolor painting. The frame was antique, ornate silver, and the painting itself was exquisite, rendered with an expert's hand. It depicted a single, perfect blue eye, rendered in painstaking detail. Leo's eye. I knew the exact shade, the little golden flecks near the iris, but it wasn't just a portrait. It was painted with a strange, thick pigment that gave it a disturbing, three-dimensional quality. And on the back of the frame, a tiny engraved plaque read, "Sight, the flawed window." A wave of nausea so profound it buckled my knees, washed over me. This wasn't a ransom note. This was a gallery invitation. It was a piece of a collection. And the cold, chilling realization that dawned on me was that the curator wasn't just going to kill my son, she was disassembling him.
I didn't show the painting to the police. How could I? How could I explain that I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the paint was mixed with his blood? They would think I was insane, a grieving mother lost to hysteria. Detective Miller, a tired man with kind eyes, was already looking at me with such pity. He told me it was a sick prank, a way for a monster to get a reaction. He urged me to stay put, to let them put a patrol car on the street, to wait. But he didn't understand. Waiting was giving in to the silence. It was letting the void win. That note, as monstrous as it was a communication. It was a crack in the silent wall that had been built around me. It was a voice in the dark, and I had to follow it. My bond with Leo, the one I had prided myself on, the one that felt almost psychic, that was all I had left. The curator was counting on it, I knew. She was weaponizing my love, turning my greatest strength into my fatal flaw. The thought that my intuition was being used as a lure didn't matter. The hope, however poisonous, that I could still reach him, that our connection could somehow transcend this horror, was a blinding light. I was so desperate to hear his voice again that I couldn't see the obvious trap closing around me. The stakes were no longer just about finding him alive. They were about my sanity, my identity, the very core of who I was as a mother. That evening, as the autumn sun bled across the horizon in streaks of orange and purple, I drove. The Hemlock House stood on a hill overlooking the town, a dark silhouette against the dying light. It was a classic Victorian, the kind that looks charming in postcards with a wide porch and intricate gingerbread trim. But as I pulled into the gravel driveway, a sense of profound wrongness settled over me. The windows were dark eyes and a pale face. The air was still and cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I walked up the porch steps, each creak of the old wood echoing in the twilight stillness. Before I could knock, the heavy oak door swung open. It was her, the old woman from the park. She stood there, bathed in the warm, welcoming light from the foyer, a kindly smile on her wrinkled face. She wore a simple vintage dress and the same pristine pearl necklace. The house smelled exactly as I would have imagined, lavender and freshly baked cookies. "Sarah," she said, her voice soft and gentle, as if greeting an old friend. "I'm so glad you could make it. You're just in time. We wouldn't want to miss the final moment of purity." Her piercing blue eyes twinkled, but there was no warmth in them. Only the cold, appraising look of an artist studying their work. She gestured for me to come inside, her large, strong hand surprisingly firm on my arm as she guided me over the threshold. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound final and absolute. The lock turned with a heavy, metallic thud. And in that moment, I knew I had crossed a line from which there was no return. The quiet of my own home was nothing compared to the deep, waiting silence of this house. It was a living thing, a predator. She led me through a house that was a museum of horrors. The walls were lined not with paintings, but with her art. Framed photographs of smiling children, their faces grotesquely distorted by having their eyes and mouths crudely scratched out. A collection of tiny music boxes, each one pried open and silenced, their delicate inner workings displayed like dissected insects. It was a gallery of severed communication. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating quiet. She led me to a door at the end of a long hallway. "The viewing room," she whispered, her breath smelling faintly of cinnamon. "The acoustics are perfect down here for the final silence." She opened the door, revealing a steep set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. She gave me a gentle push and I stumbled forward, catching myself on the railing. The door slammed shut behind me and I heard the bolt slide home. A single bare bulb flickered on, casting a sickly yellow light over the scene below. It was a basement, cold and damp, with a dirt floor and stone walls. And in the center of the room, my world ended. Leo was there. He was standing on a small wooden stool, his back to me. He was wearing that same red t-shirt from that day. "Leo!" I breathed, a sob of relief and terror catching in my throat. He didn't turn. He couldn't. As he shifted slightly, I saw the crude, bloody bandages wrapped around his head. Where his ears should have been, they were just stitched, ragged holes. Another set of bandages covered his eyes. A thick rope descended from a beam in the ceiling, a perfectly tied noose hanging inches from his small neck. "No," I whispered, the sound a dry rasp. I lunged for the stairs, but my feet were rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a horror so absolute it stole the air from my lungs. A small speaker crackled to life from a corner of the room, and the curator's calm, reedy voice filled the basement. "A mother's voice," she said thoughtfully. "Such a chaotic instrument, full of messy emotions. I found a way to purify it, to make it perfect." My scream was a raw, primal thing torn from the deepest part of my soul. "Leo, baby, it's Mommy. Don't look, please, Leo." I shrieked, my voice echoing off the cold stone walls, but my words were just noise. They couldn't reach him. He couldn't see the terror on my face, couldn't hear the desperation in my voice. The psychic bond we shared, the connection I had built my life around is gone. She had cut it. She had physically severed every wire of communication, leaving only a hollow shell. From the speaker, the curator continued, her tone conversational. "I've been talking to him. Simple, pure commands. He's such an obedient child, so eager to please. Now, he only hears what is perfect." I watched in unimaginable agony as Leo, my sweet boy, began to rock gently on the stool, a simple, tuneless melody, a sound of contentment. He didn't know I was there. He didn't know he was in danger. He was lost in a silent world she had created for him. "Leo, my love, please listen to my heart. Feel me. I'm here," I begged, sobbing, tied at my own throat as if I could tear the feelings out and send them to him. The curator's voice came again, cold and final. "Now for the last brushstroke. A perfect final silence. Take a step forward, my dear." As if in a trance, Leo's small foot lifted. He obediently stepped forward off the edge of the stool. The rope snapped taut. There was a sickening crack that echoed in the sudden absolute silence. His small body dangled, swaying gently, and through the speaker I heard the curator give a soft, satisfied sigh. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was my son. My art, my entire world had hanging still and silent, a finished masterpiece in a gallery of horrors.
The screaming eventually brought them. A neighbor, finally noticing the strange car, the open door, the sounds from a house long thought empty.
The flashing lights of the police cars were a distant, meaningless pulse in a world that had lost all color, all sound, all meaning. They found her upstairs, sitting in a rocking chair, humming quietly to herself as she sipped a cup of tea, the string of pearls glowing at her throat. They said she didn't resist. She simply smiled her kindly, wrinkled smile and told them her collection was now complete. They found me in the basement, alive but not there. I was huddled in the corner, my hands covering my own ears, my eyes squeezed shut, rocking back and forth in the dirt. I haven't spoken a word since. The part of me that formed words, the part that connected to the world, was severed as surely as if she had taken a knife to it herself. I now live in a world of silence. The quiet I once cherished has become the void I always feared. They have me in a clean, white room with a window that looks out onto a garden. The doctors are kind. They talk to me, try to show me pictures, play me music, but it's all just noise from a world I no longer belong to. My art is gone. My love is a ghost. I have become my mother, a silent portrait of grief, a living embodiment of a connection that was stolen. The silence is no longer an absence of sound, it is a presence. It is the last, perfect, eternal brushstroke of the curator's masterpiece. And I am her art, preserved forever in the agony of what I can no longer say.
There are more scares to share. Press the like button and subscribe so you don't miss a single terrifying moment. You're helping me investigate the deepest, darkest corners to bring you stories that haunt your dreams.